Like we're still waiting on one person, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is our Faith and Democracy Spiritual Leaders Responding to Rising Threats. I'm Aspen Rafak, a research intern at the Whitburn Center and your moderator for today. The Whitburn Center was founded at UW Oshkosh in 2021 and focuses on nonpartisan applied research to improve governance and public policy in Wisconsin. In spring of 2024, David Hines and Scott McCallum founded the Whitburn Center, and we just took it under our wing this year. It was founded in partnership with the Carter Center. WISAC works to build bridges across the political spectrum, increase public trust, and prevent political violence. Just going to go ahead and meet our team that made this possible today. It was brought to you by Amanda Pierron, an undergraduate research intern majoring in political science and social science education, and Areli Alvarez, graduate assistants in our Masters of Public Administration program. Then we have myself, Aspen Rafak, a research intern, and in addition to my work at Whitburn, I currently also serve as the coordinator of youth faith formation at the First Congregational Church in Oshkosh. So why this panel? As of July 2025, NPR found that 73% of Americans believe political violence is a serious issue. That's across the political spectrum, and it reflects the unease many of us are feeling. In June, a targeted shooting in Minnesota killed State Representative Melissa Hortman, her husband Mark, and their family dog. Senator John Hoffman and his wife were also critically injured. These tragedies aren't isolated, they're part of a disturbing national trend. They raise the question, what role can spiritual communities play in helping us heal and protect public life? To help us reflect, we've brought together 4 incredible faith leaders. Each of them works at the intersection of spiritual life and civic responsibility, and each brings wisdom from their communities in today's conversation. Moving forward, I'm just going to pull up a slide with your name on it, and when your slide comes up, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great. I'm going to start with Rev Nee. You want to turn on your mic and let us get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, my pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see all of you on the screen. My name is Niado Abrahams. My pronouns are he, him, and as you can see, I am the director of campus ministry and associate pastor at Pres House, which is a Presbyterian campus ministry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I've been here for just over 5 years, started in the summer of 2020, which was a terrible time to start my first job in campus ministry because I spent the entire year online. But it's been an amazing experience. I love working with college students, and this question of political violence, faith-based violence in our society is one that's really active for our students. Both in terms of they've come from communities that have experienced this. We have students who are from Minnesota, and so it's on their mind from their communities. It's on their mind as a threat on campus, and it's on their mind because they see it in the news all the time. So I'm grateful for the invitation to be a part of this conversation and hope to offer some insight as well as receive some insight.
Yeah. Rhonda, if you'd like to take the mic for a moment.
Sure. Thanks, Aspen. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I work with 2 different organizations. I am the statewide interfaith organizer for the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, which is pretty self-explanatory. We're a group that works to promote voter engagement through our network of congregations, interfaith organizations, and also those groups that are in the voting rights landscape. And I'm also the education director for Tikkun Ha'ir, which is a Jewish social justice group in Milwaukee. We have many topic areas as we work to help alleviate issues and conditions in Milwaukee. The word Tikkun Ha'ir is taken from a very well-known Hebrew phrase, which is Tikkun Olam, which means to repair the world. We are a group of only 4 part-time workers, so we have taken the challenge of Tikkun Ha'ir, which is to repair the city, and that is the city of Milwaukee. Aspen, I want to say thank you again for inviting me to this panel. And when you reference what happened in Minnesota, I want to just say a very, very, very quick story, and that sometimes political violence is always extreme, but it seems remote. And I was home the day of the shooting in Minnesota, turned on the television, and was shocked by the news of the death of the congresswoman. But when they showed the picture of Senator John Hoffman, it hit home. My son was an intern for Senator John Hoffman in 2020 and worked on his election team that that election year. So I learned a lot about Senator Hoffman, who he was, the family man he was, the person he was, and how much my son just loved working for him. And it struck such a chord because this issue of political violence was personal to us. We knew the victim. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Rhonda, and thank you for pointing that out. I think that represents a big part of what we try to do at WISACT is show how local political violence and issues with our democracy can be here in Wisconsin and the nearby states as well. Next up, we have Rev. Breanna. Would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. My name is Breanna Illene, she, her, and I'm the Director of Ecumenical Innovation and Justice Initiatives at the Wisconsin Council of Churches. I'm also going to claim Addo, he's on our board. Um, but I handle our public policy, and am often down at the state capitol, helping to bring a faith voice to the capitol. And then also do a lot of on the ground advocacy work and justice work. Have been particularly involved in some of this conversation and equipping and connecting of how do we respond in our local communities when there are acts of violence, whether they be these really um, public events, but also there's so much violence happening in our communities sometimes that there are ways to respond and ways to prevent. So excited to be here with you all.
We have Dr. Gerald Mast. For those of you who don't know, I actually transferred into University of Wisconsin Oshkosh from the university that Dr. Gerald Mast teaches at. And so I was really excited to be able to get him on this panel. Gerald, if you'd like to do an introduction.
Yeah, I'm Gerald Mast, pronouns he, him. I am a professor of communication at Bluffton University. I wish that Aspen was still with us as a student. They were a marvelous student when they were here. Um, I teach courses that I understand to be intrinsic to the health of democracy, courses like argumentation and advocacy, communication for the common good, public speaking, religious communication, and so on. In these courses, I try to get my students to work hard at evidence-based reasoning, to work hard at listening to the perspectives and experiences of others, to be able to express themselves in public spheres in ways that involve patience, but also taking positions that they're committed to. Bluffton is affiliated with the Mennonite Church USA, which you may know as one of the historic peace churches that includes Quakers, Brethren, and Mennonites. Uh, a peace church is a form of Christian church that has featured peace and reconciliation as a prominent teaching to the point of opposing involvement in what are generally considered respectable forms of violence or the threat of violence, such as military service, and in some cases, even policing. These have been positions that in which these three groups have often had to work together, particularly during times of war, to find alternatives to military service, to advocate for conscientious objection, for example, um, and to in some ways endure violence from the national community against dissenters to war when there is this sense of we're all in this together and people who don't fly the flag or who are taking a principled posture against military involvement are a threat to the integrity of the nation. So there are those stories in my background and in our church background that that we bring to this discussion. Maybe that's enough for now.
Thank you all first for your introductions. We're going to go ahead and jump into our first question. But first, we have a quick note for our panelists to help us stay on time. We don't need you to feel pressure to answer every single question. Just feel free to jump in when you feel called to or where your experience speaks directly to the topic. Now, with that said, we have our first question. Each of you works at the intersection of faith and public life. How has the rise in faith-based violence, whether against or within your religious communities, impacted your community emotionally or spiritually? And I'll let whoever wants to grab that one first can go ahead. I don't really want to call on people. If you have to put me in that position, I will, but whoever wants to take it first can.
Aspen, I'll relieve you of the burden. I'll get us started. This question, it took me actually a little bit to realize what the answer to this question might be for my community. Thankfully, in my time at UW-Madison, we haven't had any incidents of political violence against the Press House community. There have been incidents of anti-Semitism on campus, and that's kind of a consistent theme in my time at UW-Madison. Incidents often at the beginning of the year. And as well as things like the shooting that happened in Minnesota. There have been school shootings in Michigan and in Florida. And all of these things are kind of floating in the air as like the atmosphere that our students live in. The college students that I work with don't know a world without political violence sort of happening all the time, it seems like. And not just the violent acts themselves, which we've seen an increase in, but like the legitimization of them through like our politicians speaking in ways that kind of encourage that rhetoric. And so I think a lot of them are scared emotionally. They're anxious about the possibility of violence. And there was a moment early in my time at Press House where we had an incident where someone came into the building in the middle of service. Thankfully, nothing happened. They were intoxicated, and we were able to escort them out of the building and get them some help. But our students still talk about that. Some of them, that was their first time worshiping with us. Some of them, it was the first time being in a church in a long time. And imagine entering a church that's supposed to be a place of physical, spiritual, and emotional safety, and someone invades that space. That's really challenging to hold and bear. And that's kind of what all of our students are carrying all of the time. Even if it's not present at the front of their mind, they know that if they get on their phone, they'll probably see another incident. Or if their phone pings them, it might be another incident. And that, I think, is a really challenging thing for college students with underdeveloped brains to have to carry all the time.
Right. Thank you, Reverend, for getting us started. It's always hard to be the first one to speak. When you talk about violence and how it impacts the faith community, it's hard to talk about violence in synagogue life. We've seen an increase in anti-Semitism. Thank you for recognizing that. We've seen an increase in tremendously violent crimes of anti-Semitism in this country, whether it's the arson in Governor Shapiro's house, the murder of the couple in front at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., and the firebombing of the people speaking out for the hostages in Boulder, Colorado. And of course, I remember the very vividly the violence at the Tree of Life. And we see violence in all political area, in all areas. It hits home a lot in a synagogue life. I go to services almost every Friday night. I participate in Sunday school activities in different congregations, both in Chicago and in Milwaukee. You must get past an armed guard there, and the armed guard has a gun on them. And when we gather in commemoration, there are police officers with long rifles, and they are there to protect us. And I tell the people in our community who feel very insecure with this, that it is for our security. But I can imagine what it's like for a non-Jew to walk into a synagogue and see an armed guard there. And yet our preschoolers, our Sunday school students, people like me, this is what we're used to. And I'm afraid that what has become normal in synagogue life will become normal in all congregational life. I'm not an expert in all congregations, but I do know that almost every synagogue has armed security. And it is an awful, awful presence we have and a reality we face. And what will happen when this needs to be brought to other houses of worship? I can only say that there's a beautiful prayer in Judaism, a beautiful song, and it says, if we build this world with love, then this world will have love. And we sing this after we enter a synagogue that is guarded with armed security.
The first thing that occurred to me in response to this question is the reality that my congregation is part of a network of 3 local Mennonite congregations that belong to the same conference. And our involvement with local Haitian immigrants, over 2,000 of them that have come to the city of Lima just south of us in the past few years. Like a lot of churches and faith communities in the Lima area, the Lima Mennonite Church has been heavily involved in supporting members of this community in terms of offering transportation, providing language practice, and also providing a worshiping space for them. And a substantial number of them have joined that Lima congregation. And these other 2 congregations, I live just north of there in Bluffton, which is the place where the college is located, and there's another small town nearby with another Mennonite church that all 3 of us are connected together in providing that kind of support. We have come to regard these Haitian immigrants as our friends, as brothers and sisters in Christ. And their status, their temporary protected status has been revoked. It will be gone August 3rd. And so this is the most immediate threat of violence that we experience here in our community because of our identification with and embrace of this immigrant community. The fear is, the kind of performative violence that comes from immigration customs enforcement when they show up. I would argue that that's a form of political violence because it's clearly designed not just to enforce immigration law, but to elicit political responses of both support and hostility. Closely related to this, my denomination has been involved in a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security over the sensitive areas status of faith communities such as synagogues, mosques, and churches. Can ICE come into a church to arrest someone who has taken that as a safe space? In my church conference, we have had quite a few churches who have in fact provided in past years that kind of protection by allowing immigrants to live in their church buildings. And so there's a federal judge that has ruled against that for right now, against our lawsuit. But that is an ongoing concern for my faith community, which puts us in solidarity with many faith communities who are working in solidarity with vulnerable populations, including immigrants right now.
We're going to go ahead and move on to question 2. How can religious communities distinguish between being neutral and complicit in justice?
I can start since I didn't answer last time. I will say this question actually evoked some feelings in me, and I shared it with some of my staff and had some discussion with some of my staff because I don't believe in neutrality. It is not a concept that exists. So many people who think they are being neutral are usually being compliant with the injustice. You are either pushing against something or allowing it. And so I think so often in churches, and especially traditions I come from I grew up Lutheran, I grew up in northern Wisconsin, like we don't like conflict. And so we say, let's remain neutral. But when there are injustices like the one that Professor Mast just lifted up of like community members being taken violently, like being neutral means you're not standing with people like with against this violence. It means you're just letting it happen, and that's not neutral. I do think there is something about being partisan and nonpartisan, and that's where we get into problems. And so I have a lot of this discussion in my work with churches to say, like, the gospel is political. Jesus made statements that were political and pushed against the norms of his day and pushed against injustice. And so we can be political, just don't be partisan. And I think, especially with the removal of the Johnson agreement and this idea of like, can churches speak out in political ways? I think there's a lot of discussion happening, or sorry, in partisan ways, not political ways. Can churches speak out in partisan ways? There's a lot of discussion happening in our network of like, actually, we don't think that's good either, because kind of taking this partisan side is really unhealthy. But let's continue to work for justice.
That's very well said. I would just take a moment here to talk about this new book that my friend Russ Johnson, who teaches at the University of Chicago, has come out with, Beyond Civility and Social Conflict. And he argues that what we need to be promoting is a form of compassionate resistance or dialogical criticism where we are interested in understanding where people are coming from all sides. We are open to revising our position when we find ourselves to be wrong, but we are also prepared to advocate and critique as part of the movement for peace and justice. And I find this actually quite a useful way of thinking about what does it mean to um, speak with respect and at the same time be involved in advocacy and being willing to critique. A significant part of the book involves taking civil rights movement leaders like Dr. King as a kind of model for this kind of compassionate resistance. I found the book very inspiring. That's really not saying anything different from what you were saying, Reverend.
You're just being the good professor and lifting up a book.
I
It's your role.
For that, Dr. Mast, if you don't know, we have a newsletter that we'll promote at the end, but we put like a what we're reading at the end of our youth newsletters. So we'll keep that in mind. Moving on to question 3. Where do you see faith communities stepping up or failing to step up when it comes to defending democracy? And this one kind of builds on what your responses was for the last question.
I can say that in Judaism, the Torah and the Talmud are filled with words of promoting democracy in a time where democracy wasn't even a blip on the radar. And it's really beautiful to see in so many religious practices and the foundation of them that democracy, the belief that we're all made in the image of God, or that we are all miracles of whatever process that has brought us to this space, that we all are deserving of democracy. And I know that in Judaism and in all of the interfaith groups that I work with, democracy is the key tenet of all of our work, that we want here in Wisconsin to promote voting, to promote free and fair access to the ballots. And it is rooted in almost every single one of our ideologies, whether it's from a religion represented here or a religion that is perhaps from Eastern traditions. It's really beautiful to see the common ground that all people are deserving of the dignity and the rights of voting. And for me, when I am putting on my Jewish educator hat, not my interfaith hat, there are so many prompts in the Torah, in the Talmud, that lead to democracy. And to see it in a society that is so ancient, and to see other ancient societies practicing this, it's inspiring to know that it is in our DNA, it's in our soul, it's in our universal grounding to be voters and to be participants in democracy.
Yeah. Ron, I love the way you turn our attention towards the Torah, because I think like that to me is in many ways the answer is this concept of defending democracy, I actually find personally like quite terrifying. Like, well, it's my job. This idea has been around for like millennia, and now we have to defend it, or it's going to die. Like that. I find that stressful. But I know that I belong to a tradition that says like, love your neighbor, care for the stranger in your midst, protect those who are vulnerable, learn to listen, be quick to listen and slow to speak, slow to become angry. Like these values and practices that I think are central to my tradition, to Rhonda's tradition, to the traditions that are present on this call, in many ways do nurture a flourishing society and often point us toward democracy. Often with my students, I think, there are specific things we can do. Like we've partnered with YVEC to have voter registration tables. And that's often a thing that happens at Press House. And we're constantly encouraging our students to vote. And we have a channel in our community's group chat devoted specifically to political messaging around sharing opportunities to get involved and attend protests and vote, et cetera. So like sharing those kinds of opportunities, I think, is one way I've seen our community and other communities step up to this task. But I think at its core, in some ways, it's a question of like, are we properly responding to the invitation we've been offered through our tradition to care for the vulnerable among us and to be good neighbors to each other? I think when we see faith communities doing that intentionally, regardless of who is in office and what the administration is doing, like that to me looks like defending democracy. And we will always have communities who would rather choose power than presence or vulnerability or compassion, which are very central to these traditions that we hold dear. But in some ways, it's a matter of what you choose to be led by. And those communities that are led by their faithfulness to the story that they belong to, I think are the ones that are doing a good job of defending this democracy.
I'll just
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I can also lift up some really practical ways. I appreciate this is who we are as a core. And then I just think, especially the last couple of years, some of the work I've done on voter engagement, that sort of thing, the number of our faith communities that house voting booths or um, church people or faith people who volunteer work as poll administrators. And we partnered with WIVIC and the Wisconsin Council of Churches last year. We had, was it 70, Rhonda? 70 poll chaplains who just like stood out as a friendly face in front of polling locations across the state from like the corner of Racine all the way up to like Chautauqua in northern Wisconsin. We had people just being, and it's that relational, like, let's be out in our community, let's be that voice, let's say, hey, this is what we do. And so there's just that like voting process. I think there's this huge piece that faith communities get involved in, but then also kind of what Niata was talking to of this, I don't see democracy of what happens in April and November and on election day, but it's that every day showing up. And I think about so many faith communities of whatever faith that provide that space for that mixing of people, that sharing of ideas, the like bridging divides, that saying, how do we come together? Oh, here's our need in our community. Let's figure out how to work together to address that. I think that's what is vital to the flourishing of our communities and vital to the flourishing of our democracy, whether it be that really formal, like show up and vote, all the way down to, well, what are we going to do tomorrow to address these needs that we have?
An implication of the Torah teaching that all humans are made in the image of God is that our common humanity transcends our national and I would even say our religious identity. And it seems to me that in our society specifically, the greatest challenge to that teaching is coming from Christian nationalism, the linkage between Christian churches and national identity, and then a racial component showing up in much of that, something that we could call white Christian nationalism. And it does seem to me that those of us in Christian churches need to push back against that linkage. In our context, at least it seems to me that is one of the greatest threats to democracy.
I will lift up that is a huge conversation happening in our network. Like that was my other call this morning, was recognizing, especially for in the Christian tradition, our complicity in that, and the fact that it's not so often painted as it's those people, and we're on this side, and helping like we work in our space to help us know it's all of us that are rooted in this. Like I come out of a mainline tradition. I come out of we're the Wisconsin Council of Churches, and I always lift up that we're part of this national movement of councils whose convening convention theme was one nation under God. And so this is like rooted, this Christian nationalist idea is rooted in so many of our faith traditions and so much of our faith community. And then asking how do we respond and how do we push back against that? Because there's also so much violence that is currently coming out of this movement.
Right. And I just wanted to piggyback off what Breanna said the first, which is we are talking about very elevated topics right now. And she is right that the work is done on the ground. The work is done at grassroots levels. And we are so thankful to the many of the organizations that are represented here for partnering and doing the grassroots work. I want to also give a big shout out to the Wisconsin Voting Rights Coalition. I know Breanna knows many of the members there as well, in that they are secular organizations. Their topic areas are voting rights and democracy defense, and they are extremely supportive of the faith community and our incredible ability to organize. They rely on the work of congregations to do get out the vote and to canvass and to be actual locations of polling. And it's a really beautiful connection between the secular world and the faith-based world. And I have to admit, when I came on, I was surprised by how much respect these voting rights groups have for the faith community. And to bring it, like I said, like Breanna said, to bring it down to the real work that's being done and how the both both of these secular and these faith communities come together to do the work.
I'll lift up one other example or like building on that, sorry. But like I think especially in this conversation of political violence, one of the things I found is that faith communities often have inroads into local communities that others don't have. And so we've actually partnered with some folks who are working on addressing political violence. I've been on multiple calls or gotten calls to say, hey, we've heard about threats in these communities, especially around LGBTQ folks, immigrants, other racial minorities. And so we've partnered with some secular organizations who say, okay, can you connect us to someone on the ground in this particular small town? Because we're hearing these threats and we want to make sure that they are addressed, that there are systems built for safety and security, and that they're aware of what's happening. And so I also think that's really beautiful to show that part of this much larger network, that it's on the ground all the way on up. And all of us need to work together to address violence in our communities.
For this awesome conversation. I always love it when I'm doing a panel and the question turns into like a conversation instead of answering. We're going to jump ahead just a little bit to make sure we have time for audience questions at the end. We're going to go on to question 5. Okay, many people turn away from organized religion because they see it as tied up in power or partisan politics. How do you rebuild trust in faith as a force for peace and justice?
Yeah, I think you could answer this one well. Some of the work you all are doing.
I will give it my best shot. I don't want to be like glib. I think the easiest and simplest answer is just like we have to do it. Like if we want people to trust that religious communities are places where people work for peace and justice, then one, we have to be communities that pursue peace and justice in the world. But you talked about trust, and I think trust is something that exists in relationships. So like it does mean, like we've been hearing on the call, grassroots effort, actually being in relationship, being in community with people. And then it's both, I think, offering opportunities for people to engage very specifically with this question. So one thing we've done at Press House is is a program called One Small Step. And this is actually something you can do this on your own if you literally just Google One Small Step. It's a program that invites people who are on different ends of the political spectrum, so to speak. It's not just politics, it's also life experience and story and all kinds of things. And the opportunity is just like for them to come and sit down together and share stories and get to know one another and not to convince each other of one another's viewpoint. Um, that event, I think, is very powerful in and of itself. But for us to say, we as a church are going to do this thing that is specifically and intentionally aimed at like supporting a robust common life beyond the boundaries of our community, like that to me is a clear signal of like we believe that our job as people of faith is actually to be good neighbors and not to attain power. So that's part of it. But the other thing I think, and this is just like a kind of a recent passion project of mine, like I think sometimes communities that are more interested in like supporting democracy and standing up for the rights of the poor and the marginalized, et cetera, we're not really great at telling our stories. We whisper when everyone else is shouting. And we, I think, can be better about telling our stories well, like investing time, energy, money into telling people we are doing something different than what you think we are doing. Here, come see, come learn, come experience. I think that's the answer. I hope that's what we can do, but I also would love to hear from others.
It seems to me that one of the basic responses to people who have been turned off by organized religion is just empathy and to understand it and to not really try to persuade them otherwise in terms of an argument. But two movements have come out of my denomination. One of them, something called the Coalition to Dismantle the Doctrine of Discovery, which describes itself as a 100-year project to basically change to a different economic system than extraction-based capitalism. And then the other movement is Mennonite Action, which was organized in response to the war in Gaza. In both of those movements, there's no requirement to belong to a church or a faith community to be involved. And so there, I think, are many Mennonites, Peace Church people, and many others who have gotten involved in those organizations who really have very little interest in attending religious services or any form of organized faith, but they are ready to be part of these organizations that are, in fact, self-identified as coming out of a faith tradition. And so really those are just two examples, I guess, of concrete ways that you can invite people to be part of organized faith while having many doubts and anxieties and resentments about the way that faith has been co-opted in partisan and violent ways.
I can also lift up an example of the church I currently attend has is made really dramatic, like on the ground moves that come back to that grassroots level, and is currently we had our last Sunday on Sunday of worshiping in our building, and is about to tear their building down and have completely rebranded it from church to community center, and the church will still be there. The church will still worship on the Sunday, but they've said there's needs in our community. When I moved to this neighborhood 10 years ago, there wasn't a community connection space, and this building has become that. And so the Boy Scouts use it, and there's a secular grief group that uses it, and an arts program, and all these programs. And some of us then, myself included, started with these more secular programs and then like wandered into the faith space. Or there's these interesting conversations happening of people who say, you know what, I'm never going to show up on Sunday, but like, what do you do on Sunday? Or what does it mean? Or what does it mean to build community? And what does it mean in this time when we're also disconnected? And how do we build bridges? And so I think they're like, faith communities have so many resources that whether it be a physical building, whether it be people to volunteer, whether it be like just how to run an organization, lend your 501c3 status to a startup group in your neighborhood. Like there's so many resources that established organized religion have that can help non-faith people engage in new ways.
Right. That's very similar to Tikkun Ha'ir in that we are a we represent all facets of Judaism, and we also interact with many interfaith groups and many social justice groups in and around Milwaukee. A lot of people, especially in Tikkun Ha'ir and in my Reform synagogue, I'm a Reform Jew, they say, well, my religion isn't Judaism. My religion is social action. I completely respect that. But my role as a Jewish educator is to respect that, which I do, and also to say, where does your love of social justice come from? Where does your desire for social action and to be a part of the community, where does that come from? And I try to answer that again as a Reformed Jew, as a very secular Jew, by saying somehow it's inside of you. It's in your soul, it's in your DNA. And I say to people, let's look at that and let's examine where does that come from, whether in your Jewish tradition or in some sort of agnostic, even spiritual piece of you. As a Jewish educator, again, as I've said a couple of times, I go back to the Torah and say, in your love of social justice and social action, can we connect it to who you are and who your ancestors are? Some people take to it really well, some people don't, and it's just a beautiful opportunity to say that sometimes social action leads to faith, whereas most people think faith leads to social action.
We have one last question presented, and then we'll go ahead and switch to audience questions. Question 6 is just if you could offer one spiritual teaching or story that helps you stay grounded in this moment of political chaos, what would it be?
I'm just going to very quickly say that I talk a lot about putting my Esther pants on and protecting my people. The book of Esther is a story of a queen who had to reveal her Jewish her Judaism to protect the people against persecution, oppression, and the demise of their culture. And I say that I put on my Esther pants not just as a Jew, but as a person of conscience and as a person who is fighting for democracy, whether it's in Wisconsin or in the country or just in my own little area as a poll worker, that I am doing this not just to protect my family or to protect those I love, but to protect the strangers among us and to be that light, that warrior that people need. Unfortunately, that people need these days. So that's my little phrase I sometimes say is that I'm putting my Esther pants on.
In the Christian Gospels, when Jesus is arrested, there is this moment when his disciples pull out their swords, and in one account, even cuts the ear off of one of the people who were arresting Jesus. And Jesus says various things in the different Gospels, but they all come down to something like, put away your sword. And in the Gospel of John, which has a somewhat different account, and this conversation happens with Pilate rather than with his disciples, Jesus says, my kingdom is not from this world. If it were, then my servants or my guards would fight. But since it's not from this world, they won't. This has been a really important story in my tradition in terms of saying, when you're working on behalf of the new day, the new way, the reign of God, the kingdom that's coming, remember that it is not reducible to the systems and authorities and partisan antagonisms of this world, that it comes from beyond. And our actions and our life and our speech need to reflect this kind of curiosity about what is more than, what is not reducible to our habits of thinking that come with deeply entrenched cultural, national, political, partisan patterns. of trying to do good. So that's a story that I think about a lot in these days of polarization.
Ours is real practical, and this is something that came out of COVID that a lot of the message we sent, or we like kind of helped share with people is you are not alone. I think we live in such an isolating culture that says you are alone. Culture tries to disconnect us. And part of the call of the church is that you are not alone. Jesus sent his disciples out two by two. We know that God is always with us, and we know that there's this image of the larger church that is with us too. And part of our call at the council is to try to continue to build and grow these connections. And so we always are trying to promote that, trying to say, how do we help you build these connections? But then sometimes we just walk into spaces and be like, you are not alone. And that has huge power.
Take about 10 minutes here to switch to audience questions. So if anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat or you can unmute your mic and go ahead and ask. And everyone's too shy. I do have backup questions presented, but I'd first like to let our audience try. I also like to add yeah, I was going to say I can call on our staff if I need to ask questions, but it looks like Dr. Van Auken already has. Paul asked, do you have any success stories or strategies for countering Christian nationalism?
So I kind of named already, this is a huge conversation in our network right now. I mean, I've literally in the last 24 hours talked to three different denomination groups trying to organize around, or like we're not trying, they are actively organizing around this. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is for us is one, understanding it's not an us versus them problem. It is an all of us problem. And then two is this question of how do we build community? How do we build from performative things that say this is bad and like we can denounce it or we do need to denounce it. We do need to like kind of really publicly speak, but then we also need to do that building work on the other side, the community organizing the work, the hard conversations, which sometimes happen in these really big spaces, but sometimes they happen in really small groups that push back. What are the policies of our local church? What does our like altar look like? Where do we have flags or not have flags? What does it mean to be American and what does it mean to be Christian and how are those or aren't those intertwined? I think it's a conversation that starts really individually and moves to a big like a slightly bigger group, a bigger group, a bigger group. Um, and I think part of that is also just that building of community. It actually comes back to that democracy question. What does it mean to build deep democracy that's not tied up in this Christian nationalism that's also very centered in white supremacy and patriarchy and all of these issues? So the easy answer I'd say is go talk to a neighbor about it and then move from there.
Question from Michael Ford. He asked, the comments about the difference between political and being partisan were fascinating. Any advice on how to demonstrate that nonpartisan does not mean passive or neutral?
I can speak a little bit to that because WIVIC is a nonpartisan organization, as is Tikkun Ha'ir. And in being transparent, I will say that, especially with our Milwaukee work, one of our biggest competitors is North Shore Grassroots, which is a partisan organization. And I get asked all the time, why would I work with nonpartisan if I could work for promoting my candidate? And I try to answer by saying that, first of all, nonpartisan doesn't mean neutral. It means reaching out to everyone, not just those who have already stated who they are and what they believe in. And in doing nonpartisan work, you have to have faith in the person that you are talking to, and more importantly, that you are listening to, and understand that each one of us has a right to choose what we think is best for ourselves, our family, our community, our nation, and hopefully our global earth here. It's not easy to say that everyone has a chance to voice their opinion. But when we want to suppress what might be the other side, we are literally becoming what we are fighting against. It's not an easy argument. It's not an easy discussion to have. And some people really believe in it, and some people will say, I couldn't do it. And you have to respect that. But to me, being nonpartisan is listening to what others believe in and talking to them and saying, I'm comfortable in having a conversation that will be uncomfortable. And I have to respect that person's opinion, because if I don't, then I'm becoming the very force that I'm fighting against.
I think focusing on the impact of specific policies rather than on party politics can be very helpful. For example, in the case of my church's support of Haitian immigrants in Lima, and honestly, I think this is happening in other Christian churches as well. The investment in that relationship transcends party politics, and everyone is welcome and invited to participate in care for, support for, whatever your party background, really your relationship to the church. We're interested in all help that we can get from anywhere if you care about the lives and future of these people that we have come to love. That is an approach I think that's nonpartisan, but it is definitely on the side of the care for this community of people.
So we have time for one, maybe two questions if we get through them quickly. So I'll start in the order that they came into the chat. What struggles do you observe with people understanding each other's perspectives and finding common ground, and can they build on each other?
I'm happy to take on this one. And actually, I kind of want to speak to both of the questions that are in the chat at the same time. So I'll read the second one too. So the second question says, are there any challenges to engaging youth in your respective spheres? Are there any trends you have seen when engaging with young folks in this polarized society? And since I work with college students, many of us interact with college students, but that's exclusively what I do in this faith community sense. It's hard. I think we've handed young people today like such a terrible bill of goods, not just in terms of like what's happening with climate and politics, et cetera, but like we have not really given them an opportunity to learn how to communicate well. Some of that has not been their fault. Like you go to school during COVID and you spend half of high school wearing masks and doing school online. Like you miss a very critical window of time where you learn like how to deal with someone who thinks differently than you in your classroom. Like if you don't get reps at that and then you show up in college and all of a sudden it's like college Republicans are protesting outside and there's a counter protest happening at the same time. Like if you don't have the reps to know how to handle that interpersonally, it's much more challenging to handle it when there's like a crowd and emotions are heightened. And so that's a trend that I see is like a challenge of like, how do I actually not even speak politically to someone I disagree with, but just like, how do I talk to someone who I know voted differently than me? I think previously that was not necessarily a barrier to conversation or relationship, but it is now for the students that I see and that I work with. And so that's a challenge that honestly, I'm not 100% certain how to address. I think some of that is above my pay grade. But I do think that is present. I think another trend it relates to the question of Christian nationalism. Young men are really struggling, not just in the sense of like most of our political violence is committed by white men, often young, but also they're struggling with loneliness and depression and isolation. And all of that is being fed by influencers online. And also like the beauty of a Christian nationalist movement that promises them power and prestige that they feel like they've been deprived. So we're like, this feels like kind of a depressing note to kind of land on, but it's just like to recognize like there are some forces that really exist out of our control, that we are fighting against. And I think part of our task, if we're committed to defending democracy, as we've talked about, is like being honest about these things that are happening, and helping young people to be honest about the fact that it's happening to them, that they themselves have been affected by the polarization. I think we see a lot of students who can see it out there, but cannot see it in here. And so I think part of my job is like helping you to see that it is also in you, and learning what to do with it here so that you can also learn how to deal with it out there.
I find all of that an excellent description of the students that I face every day at the university. And I would only add what is in some ways implied already, which is that I try to help students see that this sort of big struggle for democracy, that is often framed in these very dramatic terms at the national level and far away from students, as if it were something they can do nothing about, is actually most profoundly happening at the highly local level. And it involves things like just learning how to run a meeting well, where you make sure that all the voices are heard and there is an orderly process followed for decision making that everyone understands, and that you vote and you make a decision based on the majority or consensus or however have you decided. To know how to do that well, to know how to present a case well, to even just cover, a student senate meeting for the student newspaper. These are all things that seem kind of boring to students today, and they're not terribly dramatic, maybe, but that is actually where the battle for democracy will be won or lost. Are people willing to have the patience and to take the time to listen to one another in the context of a public meeting and make a decision together? Those practices, they happen, in student meetings, committee meetings, student activity club meetings. They happen, when the student decides they will bother to cover a meeting of the board of trustees for the institution, or to go ask someone a question in the administration about a decision and write an article about it. That's where democracy, it's right close at hand. It doesn't necessarily only happen at the national level.
Panelists. I'm also going to thank Amanda, who has been sitting right beside me this whole time. She's another one of our research interns, if you don't remember. She's been the person keeping me on track, letting me know when we have to jump questions, and controlling all of our slides. So thank you to Amanda. We just wanted to promote WISAC, the nonprofit organization we work for. It is the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust. We promote trust in our political system, fair, safe, and secure elections, peaceful engagement. Signing up to be a WISAC member opts you into our monthly newsletter containing updates about our work with news from around the country. We have additional opportunities for youth WISAC members, including a task force, which we'll get to on the next slide, and an additional newsletter. I wanted to let you know that when you scan the QR code, it'll ask you if you want to subscribe to our youth newsletter. You do not have to be a youth to read the newsletter. If you simply want to get to know our youth community a little bit more, you can sign up for both. And we have paid involvement experiences that we're going to get onto on the next slide. We are now hiring a WIAC task force. It is a paid fellowship for the 2025 to 2026 academic year for young adults under the age of 25. We mostly do remote work, but we're based at UW Oshkosh, where students will gain training, or non-students will gain training and experience in research, event planning, civic trust building, community monitoring and reporting, content creation, and writing. I did notice we had quite a few young people in our audience today, which is super exciting. So if anybody would like to learn more about our fellowship, you can scan that QR code and apply there as well. But other than that, that's all we had prepared for today. I would just like to again thank you for everyone. I think the conversation was really enlightening for me as a young person who is also working in the faith environment. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.